Chapter 73 of Barnaby Rudge, A Tale of the Riots of '80. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recorded by Mill Nicholson. Barnaby Rudge, A Tale of the Riots of '80 by Charles Dickens. Chapter 73. By this Friday night, for it was on Friday in the riot week that Emma and Dolly were rescued, by the timely aid of Joe and Edward Chester, the disturbances were entirely quelled, and peace and order were restored to the affrighted city. True, after what had happened, it was impossible for any man to say how long this better state of things might last, or how suddenly new outrages, exceeding even those so lately witnessed, might burst forth and fill its streets with ruin and bloodshed. For this reason, those who had fled from the recent tumults still kept at a distance, and many families, hitherto unable to procure the means of flight, now availed themselves of the calm, and withdrew into the country. The shops too, from Tyburn to Whitechapel, were still shut, and very little business was transacted in any of the places of great commercial resort. But, notwithstanding, and in spite of the melancholy forebodings of that numerous class of society who see with the greatest clearness into the darkest perspectives, the town remained profoundly quiet. The strong military force, disposed in every advantageous quarter, and stationed at every commanding point, held the scattered fragments of the mob in check. The search after rioters was prosecuted with unrelenting vigour, and if there were any among them so desperate and reckless as to be inclined, after the terrible scenes they had beheld, to venture forth again, they were so daunted by these resolute measures that they quickly shrunk into their hiding places, and had no thought but for their safety. In a word, the crowd was utterly routed. Upwards of 200 had been shot dead in the streets. 250 more were lying, badly wounded, in the hospitals, of whom 70 or 80 died within a short time afterwards. 100 were already in custody, and more were taken every hour. How many perished in the conflagrations, or by their own excesses, is unknown, but that numbers found a terrible grave in the hot ashes of the flames they had kindled, or crept into vaults and cellars to drink in secret, or to nurse their sores, and never saw the light again, is certain. When the embers of the fires had been black and cold for many weeks, the labourers' spades proved this beyond a doubt. 72 private houses and 4 strong jails were destroyed in the 4 great days of these riots. The total loss of property, as estimated by the sufferers, was £155,000. At the lowest and least partial estimate of disinterested persons, it exceeded £125,000. For this immense loss, compensation was soon afterwards made out of the public purse, in pursuance of a vote of the House of Commons, the sum being levied on the various wards in the city, on the county, and the borough of Southwark. Both Lord Mansfield and Lord Saville, however, who had been great sufferers, refused to accept of any compensation whatever. The House of Commons, sitting on Tuesday with locked and guarded doors, had passed a resolution to the effect that, as soon as the tumults subsided, it would immediately proceed to consider the petitions presented from many of His Majesty's Protestant subjects, and would take the same into its serious consideration. While this question was under debate, Mr Herbert, one of the members present, indignantly rose and called upon the House to observe that Lord George Gordon was then sitting under the gallery with the blue cockade, the signal of rebellion, in his hat. He was not only obliged by those who sat near to take it out, but offering to go into the street to pacify the mob with the somewhat indefinite assurance that the House was prepared to give them the satisfaction they sought, was actually held down in his seat by the combined force of several members. In short, the disorder and violence which reigned triumphant out of doors penetrated into the Senate, and there, as elsewhere, terror and alarm prevailed, and ordinary forms were for the time forgotten. On the Thursday, both houses had adjourned until the following Monday se'nnight, declaring it impossible to pursue their deliberations with the necessary gravity and freedom while they were surrounded by armed troops. And now that the rioters were dispersed, the citizens were beset with a new fear, for, finding the public thoroughfares and all their usual places of resort filled with soldiers entrusted with the free use of fire and sword, they began to lend a greedy ear to the rumours which were afloat of martial law being declared, and to dismal stories of prisoners having been seen hanging on lamp-posts in Cheapside and Fleet Street. These terrors being promptly dispelled by a proclamation declaring that all the rioters in custody would be tried by a special commission in due course of law, a fresh alarm was engendered by its being whispered abroad that French money had been found on some of the rioters, and that the disturbances had been fomented by foreign powers who sought to compass the overthrow and ruin of England. This report, which was strengthened by the diffusion of anonymous handbills, but which, if it had any foundation at all, probably owed its origin to the circumstance of some few coins, which were not English money, having been swept into the pockets of the insurgents with other miscellaneous booty, and afterwards discovered on the prisoners or the dead bodies, caused a great sensation, and men's minds being in that excited state when they are most apt to catch at any shadow of apprehension, was bruited about with much industry. All remaining quiet, however, during the whole of this Friday, and on this Friday night, and no new discoveries being made, confidence began to be restored, and the most timid and desponding breathed again. In Southwark no fewer than 3,000 of the inhabitants formed themselves into a watch, and patrolled the streets every hour. Nor were the citizens slow to follow so good an example, and it being the manner of peaceful men to be very bold when the danger is over, they were abundantly fierce and daring, not scrupling to question the stoutest passenger with great severity, and carrying it with a very high hand over all errand boys, servant girls, and prentices. As day deepened into evening, and darkness crept into the nooks and corners of the town, as if it were mustering in secret and gathering strength to venture into the open ways, Barnaby sat in his dungeon, wondering at the silence, and listening in vain for the noise and outcry which had ushered in the night of late. Beside him, with his hand in hers, sat one in whose companionship he felt at peace. She was worn and altered, full of grief and heavy-hearted, but the same to him. 'Mother,' he said, after a long silence, 'how many days and nights shall I be kept here?' 'Not many, dear. I hope not many.' 'You hope? Ay, but your hoping will not undo these chains. I hope, but they don't mind that. Grip hopes, but who cares for Grip?' The raven gave a short, dull, melancholy croak. It said nobody, as plainly as a croak could speak. 'Who cares for Grip, except you and me?' said Barnaby, smoothing the bird's rumpled feathers with his hand. 'He never speaks in this place. He never says a word in jail. He sits and mopes all day in his dark corner, dozing sometimes, and sometimes looking at the light that creeps in through the bars, and shines in his bright eyes, as if a spark from those great fires had fallen into the room and was burning yet. But who cares for Grip?' The raven croaked again. Nobody. 'And, by the way,' said Barnaby, withdrawing his hand from the bird, and laying it upon his mother's arm, as he looked eagerly in her face, 'if they kill me, they may, I heard it said they would, what will become of Grip when I am dead?' The sound of the word, or the current of his own thoughts, suggested to Grip his old phrase, 'Never say die'; but he stopped short in the middle of it, drew a dismal cork, and subsided into a faint croak, as if he lacked the heart to get through the shortest sentence. 'Will they take his life as well as mine?' said Barnaby. 'I wish they would. If you and I and he could die together, there would be none to feel sorry or to grieve for us. But do what they will, I don't fear them, mother.' 'They will not harm you,' she said, her tears choking her utterance. 'They never will harm you. When they know all, I am sure they never will.' 'Oh, don't be too sure of that,' cried Barnaby with a